species change? Originally, there must have been just one type of finch in the Galapagos. But over time, it had diversified into many kinds, with different beak shapes. The same for the tortoises. One type of tortoise must have turned into many kinds, with different shells, depending on which island they lived on. With this great insight, Darwin entered dangerous new territory. The standard view at the time was that God had created every species, and that what God had created was perfect and could not change.
But Darwin said, no, why would the Creator bother with making slightly different finches for each of these different islands that all looked alike?
The prevailing view just didn't make sense. But this was only the beginning of Darwin's revolution. He turned his attention to the fossils he had collected in South America. One was of a giant sloth. Another was of a huge armadillo-like creature. These animals were extinct. But little sloths still existed in South America, and so did smaller armadillos. What could this mean?
It dawned on him that they resembled each other, so what he had found in the ground were the buried ancestors of the living animals of South America.
So again, here was more evidence that species changed. Somehow, these ancient giants must have been transformed into the smaller creatures we see today. But what Darwin would later find out took this idea of how species change into a completely new league. In Victorian times, scientists routinely studied life forms at the embryonic stage. How these tiny forms develop from just a single cell into an entire creature has long been seen as one of the wonders of nature.
Watching a developing embryo is truly the most glorious miracle of nature. I mean, no baloney.
What Darwin learned from studying the embryos amazed him. In snake embryos, you could see tiny bumps, the bony rudiments of legs. But these would never develop in the adult snake. Darwin wondered, were snakes somehow descended from animals with legs? He learned that whales, which have no teeth as adults, had them as embryos. Those teeth disappeared before they were born. To Darwin, it had to mean whales were descended from creatures with teeth. But human embryos provided the most startling evidence. Under the microscope, tiny slits around the neck were clearly visible. Exactly the same structures were found in fish. But in fish, they turned into gills. In humans, they became the bones of our inner ear. Surely, this showed that humans must be descended from fish. It's an astonishing thought.
I don't know about your ancestors, but mine included priests and, the usual suspects. But the idea that all of us have fish in our family tree, I think it's amazing.
And so Darwin arrived at an astonishing conclusion, one that would become central to his understanding of the great diversity of life.
Darwin had this amazingly bold idea, the tree of life, that all species were connected. And what it meant was, if you go far enough back in our family tree of humans, you'll come to fish. If you go far enough back in the family tree of birds, you'll come to dinosaurs. So that creatures that don't look anything at all like each other are actually deeply connected. No one came close to having this idea before Darwin.
This seemed to be an explanation for the vast diversity of animals. Beginning with a common ancestor, over time, across generations, species could change dramatically. Some might add new body features. Others might drop them. Ultimately, one type of creature could be transformed into something utterly different. It's a process Darwin called descent with modification. But it all begged a question. Why? What was making creatures change? Darwin needed clues, and he found them in a very surprising place. Dogs. Big, small, fat, tall. The British have long been obsessed by them. It was a full-blown love affair in Victorian England. Even Her Majesty was dog crazy. That love affair still continues today, especially among scientists like Heidi Parker at the National Institutes of Health.
So one of the most interesting things about dogs is the kind of variation that you have. And we have dogs the size of groundhogs versus a dog like Zeppy, the Leonberger, who can get to be the size of a mule deer. If we had that kind of size variation in humans, we would have people running around the size of Barbie dolls.
In his day, Darwin knew this range of sizes hadn't come about by chance. Through a careful process of selection, dog breeders mixed different dogs with different physical traits to create new forms.
Darwin was intrigued by what he was seeing breeders doing with the domestic dog. They could select for individual traits like size or shape, and they could actually change their breed.
The Whippet, for example, had been developed to chase rabbits. It was created by mixing greyhounds for speed with terriers used to hunt small game. And then it hit Darwin. Was there a similar form of selection going on in nature, but without human interference? Could natural selection explain the great diversity of life?
It was brilliant. He took something very familiar and comfortable, for example, animal breeding, and explained that the same sort of thing was going on in nature, just at a little bit different pace and with no human guide.
But what could be carrying out selection in the wild? It was then that Darwin took a completely fresh look at nature.